It's no secret that I am a fan of the Red Rotor RROSD Pro PDB. Me and, well, I dare say everybody in my local flight club pretty much uses these in our builds. We all like OSDs, which I know not everybody does. And you're going to have a PDB anyway. It's all in one, voltage regulation, etc. Makes for a really clean build. Somebody asked me, well, how do you think it stacks up against the QuadRevo PowerOSD Pro? And so I thought I'd make a video about that. I actually was not familiar with the QuadRevo PowerOSD Pro. Well, what do you know? And I've done as detailed a rundown as I can of these two boards, and they are really, really similar in how their features stack up. In fact, and they are the exact same price. They're both $35. So I think that it's hard to pick one of these as a very clear winner. If you like one or the other, I think you should go for it. Here are some of the differences I noticed. On the RROSD Pro, the VTX pins point to the back, the cam pins point to the front, which is where your camera and your video transmitter are usually going to be. Whereas on the PowerOSD Pro, it looks like the video transmitter and the camera connector are on the same side. So you're going to have one wire running underneath your PDB and kind of turning around instead of plugging in a little more conveniently. You can see that the layout of the main battery leads is a little different. So usually you're going to have those two, you might have those two in a wiring loom, for example, but usually you're going to run those two together. And in this case, you're probably going to end up having to put like a zip tie right here, having to run them like this toward the center with a zip tie, and then have it come out, as opposed to here where they just run in straight side by side. That would bug me a little bit. There's been a lot of discussion about the placement of the RROSD Pro's battery pads. People saying, can we please not have pads, at least have pads on either side of the board, if not at the four corners, because running the wires from your ESCs all the way over to the underside. I've had some builds where with the ESCs mounted on the arms of the copter, the stock factory wires, it was a little tight to get them to fit, and I had to be really careful about how I soldered and ran the wires. And that was on a 220 size frame. If it was on a 250 size frame, I don't think it would have worked. I would have had to extend those wires. Nobody wants to do that. But the designer of the board has said, sorry guys, there's just nowhere else on the PDB to put the pads. You're going to have to deal with it. All right. These ones on the PowerOSD Pro, the positive is over here and the negative is over here. And maybe you guys are going to tell me that there's some hidden benefit to this, that like, oh yeah, I didn't think of it that way. That seems like it's like the one way to do it that's worse. Because now, instead of all the wires going to the same place, half the wires are going under the board over here, half the wires are going over here. I don't know, that seems like it would drive me a little crazy. Also, notice that although there are vias here, these little dots here are vias, and they're designed to, well, one of the things they do is they help spread the heat between multiple layers on the board. This is probably a 4-layer board, I would guess, which means that there's 4 layers of copper signal trace in the board, separated by masking material to keep the electricity from flowing. And if you put a via between the layers, you can then sort of have a quadruple thick layer of copper to help soak up the heat. That's the same reason these little holes are here all around it looks like perforations around the outside of the pads. The idea there is that via makes electrical and heat continuity between the multiple layers and helps. You ever had a board that you soldered on a lot and then the pad it lifted off of the board? Yeah, that's to help prevent that, to help spread the heat out. So I can't help but notice that on this one, there's no pad, there's no solder pad on the bottom of the board. There's mask. And that's a big, I guess whoa, I found an advantage. That's an advantage to me for the RROSD Pro because you can solder to the underside of the board if you like. When I did my last build, it was convenient for me to put 2 of them on the underside and 2 of them on the top. 2 of them on the underside were a little bit tight because, like I said, the pads are all the way over on one side. So I did the ones on the underside first, and then I turned the board over, set it in place, and did the ones on top. And I didn't have to worry about, sort of fiddling it all around. I didn't think that the ones on the underside would have reached as easily if they were on the top. So the fact that this doesn't have the solder pads on the bottom certainly seems like a thing. The PowerOSD Pro has a solder jumper for NTSC or PAL, whereas the RROSD Pro use the menu to select it. I think you hold down the button when powering it up, something like that makes it switch. I don't really think there's an advantage either way there. The PowerOSD Pro puts out 10 volts. The RROSD Pro puts out 12 volts. Now that's the same as makes no difference. Doesn't really matter. But the RROSD Pro, at least in version 1.3, which is the latest version as of now, it has the ability to choose either 12 or 5 volts to your camera and either 12 volts or unfiltered raw pack voltage to your VTX. And that is a great feature that Red Rotor added in response to some feedback from the earlier versions of the board. It's especially relevant because if you have a TS5823 video transmitter, it is rated for up to 17 volts, I think. But in reality, if you feed it 4S voltage, it will burn eventually. It'll burn out eventually on many copters. Many people have had this experience. And so you really need to give it regulated voltage. On the other hand, if you've got something like a Fat Shark 250 milliwatt video transmitter, it has good enough filtering on board. The regulator is properly spec'd, and it can take raw pack voltage, at which point you have the option to feed raw voltage to it and take some of the load off of this 12-volt regulator, which is certainly a good thing. So if you had some LEDs you wanted to run off this regulator, you did the math and it would just barely fit, you could put your video transmitter on the raw pack voltage, especially if you were running, if you were running 3S, you just run the LEDs off 3S, never mind that. But you have a few more options in terms of what you feed to your camera and your video transmitter here, and don't believe that this one has that. It just gives 10 volts to the camera and the video transmitter, and that's it. You don't have the choice for 5 volts, and you don't have the choice for raw voltage to your video transmitter. So those are some ways that they stack up. You're not going to be disappointed with either of these, I don't think. The PowerOSD Pro has a feature in the OSD, which I'm trying to find a description of it. Basically, if you have a low voltage warning, there's like 2 stages of low voltage warning, where one of them is just like a temporary warning if you're in voltage sag, but then if it stays low, then it's like, no, really. That doesn't really seem like a big draw to me, because you have an OSD, it's got a milliamp hour reading. That's what you should be working off of, not voltage, really. I guess voltage matters a little bit. You could be at 900 milliamp hours out of an 1100 milliamp hour pack, so you're not quite done yet, but you do this big punch out and your battery voltage sags from like 14.3 to like 13.0 volts. You're like, well, okay, I haven't killed the milliamp hours yet, but the voltage does matter. I don't want to puff my battery. So yeah, okay, that's fine. And then of course the RROSD Pro is in development, soon to be released, has a lap timer and transponder feature where your lap count and lap time will be displayed in the OSD. Now that's cool, especially if you're racing. You don't need your buddy standing there with a pocket watch, a stopwatch, timing your laps. You can just be racing and you can see your times and you can push for a better time. You can see, whatever you're doing, if it's making you slower or faster. That is a really cool feature, and of course, I don't think the PowerOSD Pro supports that. So if you're, kind of a hardcore racer and you think you might set that up at your track or, heck, in your yard, that certainly would be something that would make you lean toward the RROSD Pro. So there you go. There's a rundown of these boards. And the QuadRevo weighs 5 grams. The RROSD Pro weighs 8 grams. 3 grams. I don't know. They seem really close. Pick the one you like the best. Hope that's helpful. Happy flying.